Good evening, friends, and welcome to a special edition of the Bill Crane Report. I've often thought that one of the problems with my other shows is it's sort of lacking in grace and charm. So to that end, I decided to kind of spice up our guest list a little. I called Katy Perry, she wasn't available, and Anne Hathaway was not available, but Thelma Ravinski was, and she agreed to come on the program. So, Thelma,
Reluctantly.
welcome, reluctantly.
Thank you.
And Thelma is going to talk with us tonight about the history of the Highland Lake area. And she's done a great deal of research. So without any further ado, Miss Grace and Charm, let right ahead and start.
Oh, that's very flattering, but I'm going to try to briefly tell you about Highland Lake, because Highland Lake was a gem. We were fortunate to get Highland Lake.
Yeah.
At one time, of course, we weren't a town. We were with Wrentham and Walpole and other towns, and to make up our town. And Jeremiah Morse, who was a wheelwright from Medfield, owned about 120 acres plus from a grant. King Charles II probably gave the grant, probably to his family. And he married a woman, Elizabeth Hammond, and she probably gave some of the grant money and land, because he had quite a bit. And the Stop River came down, well, I'll start from Sharon's Duck Farm, and it flowed under Route 1A, alongside of the prison, which you can see today, and down to the southeastern part of this land. And it divided Walpole and Wrentham. And he wanted to build a sawmill and a corn mill. And he asked the town of Wrentham if they would give him permission, which they did. And he built a dam there, because the Stop River came down and fell over a falls of about 16 to 18 feet. And that formed a beautiful place to start a sawmill. And that's what he did. And he also had established a homestead, 18 Campbell Street, where Carl Nelson and his wife Dorothy, who later became married to Cheevers after he died. Well, he had a son, Benjamin, by his first wife, who was Sarah Fales. The Fales family were from Walpole. And she had another son, I think, that died in childbirth by the name of Joseph. So he had the one son, and the wife died probably about 1726, I guess. And that same year, he married again to another Sarah. This was Sarah Blake, and she was from Medfield. And he had a son, Nathan. So Benjamin probably worked with his father, and I know the historians have gotten it wrong, that he wasn't 2 years old, as is written in some of the works. But when he died, the heirs signed off the property in favor of Benjamin. And Benjamin, did I say that Jeremiah's first, I can't remember now what I said, but it was Benjamin. They had married Sarah Fales and had a son, and Peter, and then Sarah died, the first one, and he remarried the Blake. and had a son. Well, Sarah Blake's brother was James Blake Jr., and he was a blacksmith, and he wanted to have a shop there. And so he bought a third of the dam to run the blacksmith shop. And we'll show picture 1. And this is what was in the area at one time, the people that lived there and everything. And so we'll go on to picture 2. You can see, I'll have to put my glasses on for this one. Yeah, you can see where the forge and everything was and where the homestead is. And that's on Campbell Street, number 18 Campbell Street. Okay, now Benjamin died, and Peter would run the sawmill, and his brother Nathan run the grist mill. They worked with Mr. Blake, but Peter lost interest in the sawmill, and he traded this to his uncle Amaziah Fales. And Amaziah Fales gave Peter land and the house that he was living in because Peter wanted to farm instead of doing the mill work. And he owns the Morse house now. Nathan built a house on Seekonk Street, and that is the site of William Allen and also Philip Lang house. And James Blake ran the blacksmith shop with Aaron Clark Fales, who was the son of Amaziah Fales. And they gathered the bog iron, which is an inferior iron of a compound of ferrous oxide, commonly be called limonite. And it's extracted by a trip hammer. They got the iron from Spice Brook, it was once called. Now it's Spring Brook in Walpole, and also at Granite Street between Medfield and Walpole. And luckily there was a limestone quarry located at Lincoln Road nearby, which was once called Back Street. That's the street that you probably, if you've read how Washington came with his troops into Norfolk and took a back road that would go down past Boardman Street onto the town. But he did that because there were Tories in the area, and those are the people that were in favor of the English. But that was Back Street. And Uncle Amaziah's sons, Aaron Clark and Nathan, ran the blacksmith operation. He had 3 sons. He had a son, Samuel, but Samuel went elsewhere. And the sawmill was torn down about that time. Amaziah died, and his son, Aaron Clark, leased the privilege of the dam to his nephew, Squire Miller Fales. They had consolidated a parcel of land large enough for a huge foundry operation at the falls, because when Jeremiah had the dam there, he dammed it up. It was a perfect spot. It was a perfect spot for operating mills. Now, Nathan's son, Squire Miller, for capital, because he needed money, he turned to a man, Shepherd Leach of Easton, and formed a partnership with him, and he borrowed money to do this. Leach, I think, was a good name for this man. He was good-natured and generous in a way, and he sang in the church choir, but he was obsessed about controlling all the foundries in the south of Boston. He was greedy businessman, and Squire Miller needed money. So he borrowed and had to pay him back about $300 every 3 months at an interest rate of 12%. Now, Fales failed to pay the $6,000 that was owed, and Leach's son-in-law, Lincoln Drake, on October 11th, and that was 1828, had the county sheriff come and deliver an arrest warrant to Fales. Squire Miller refused to pay the debts. Now, Squire Miller hired a newly appointed legislator from Franklin by the name of Horace Mann to handle his case. Now, Horace won the case, but later Lincoln Drake repealed it, and Silas didn't have the money or the funds to satisfy the judgment. His house, property, and all, even the beef that was hanging in the barn and the ham and furniture, was part of the payment. And he doesn't show up at the trial, so he lost his share in the blast furnace and his part of the privilege to Drake. So he was in a bad way. Shepard died in an accident, and I don't know if it was a car accident or what, but he died, and his son-in-law, Lincoln Drake, partners with a man named Leonard Fuller. And I'd like to have a picture be number 2. This is a picture of the blacksmith shop. That building that's on there was put on, I don't know by whom, but this shows what the shop looked like. It's still standing. That part of it's still standing in back of the old Morse house. And you can show the next picture. That's another picture of it. And we would like to reconstruct it, I guess, and have people be able to see what it was like. Now, would you show picture number 5? This stove, I had gone to see at the Walpole Historic Society on Tuesday because they purchased the stove, and it was refurbished by a man down in Rhode Island, Brandon Pino, and that's him there. And they finished it like this. Beautiful stove, and it was made by Mr. Fuller from Walpole in 1837. And you see you wouldn't believe what that stove could do. Where he is kneeling on the top part, it can open on 2 sides if you have a roast in there. The wood goes on the bottom of that stove where the plates are. Those plates can be taken off, and there's all sorts of appliances that can be put there on that stove. And it was a chef stove because years ago, women used to cook with a fireplace, and sometimes they got badly burned, you know, and of course they couldn't cook as well. But this was like the great.
And I imagine that's a pretty heavy stove too.
If you ever saw it put together, you wouldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And if anybody wants to look at it, I'm sure if they contact the society in Walpole, they can see it because it's probably the only one left in the country.
Wow.
But how fortunate they were to go on eBay to see this and be able to buy it from.
And it was clearly marked on there, the maker's name and all.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that was fortunate.
Oh, yes.
There's probably not more than a handful of them left.
I
if
don't know
that.
if they have any. They were so fortunate.
Wow.
Yeah, but he ran the forge and for several years. And of course, they were lucky to be able to have a place to make these stoves.
Mm-hmm. Is there any records of how many were made, or?
I don't think
No.
so. But you know, when the sawmill came to be, it was a wonderful thing because years ago, when the people came over from England, they had built houses with thatched roofs.
Mm-hmm.
They would have to put up a ladder to the side of it in case there was a fire, and then they had a bucket brigade. So they were able to have shingles now. You know, and when the sawmill was built, they had to make like a ditch. One fellow would go on the ditch, and they would have the log over the top. One would be sawing at the top and the other at the bottom. They had to be pretty strong.
Yeah.
They had to be, and how tedious.
You had to do that all day.
Yeah, and having a sawmill was a boon.
Yeah.
And they could have, finally, they could have wooden floors because a lot of the houses,
And dirt floors.
even some that in the second oral history book that I had interviewed people, they had a dirt floor.
Yeah. Yeah.
The dirt floors. So now they could have wooden floors.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't have to have cattail rushes
Right.
on them, yeah. So the iron making came to an end and was sold to a paper maker from Norwood, Mass. By the name of Isaac Ellis. And when he died, his wife Emily sold it to the Campbells, George and Thomas. They were 4 brothers, but some of them stayed in England. One of them did anyway. And Stephen, his name was. And then Thomas, I think, went to Medville or Millis and worked there at a business. And then there was George, who went elsewhere. So I think that probably George Campbell's the one that ran the mill. And about 1850, the railroad came through. It was in Norfolk County. And George built a little yellow stucco station located near the Arch Bridge, which is on Campbell Street. And it's opposite the foundry office of the Leach site. And they named it Campbell's Station. And probably a lot of people would remember that. And George thought he was entitled to a free ride on the train. So we'll see the next picture of
There it is.
Yeah. And of course, the superintendent in Boston, C.C.F. Bent, sent out a notice to the conductors, and you'll see what he said. He wasn't going to get a free ride.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, these are the forerunners of the Campbell family that lived in town later?
No, they
No?
weren't related.
No relation?
These
Oh.
Campbells came from England,
Okay.
and they lived in Newton. And this is Campbell. I guess he was interested in paper making, and
Wow.
that's what he wanted to do. So finally,
So Mr. Bent
The
put
black-
an end to the riding for free.
yeah, he's not gonna have anything to. That man was quite a guy, I guess. He thought he had the privilege. Well, blast furnace was obliterated and a new higher dam was constructed, and in 1852, Norfolk County Railroad reached to Franklin. And about 1875, the railroad opened an excursion park, Highland Lake Grove, along the western shore of the lake, because 1875 was 5 years after the town of Norfolk was incorporated.
Yeah.
And we had the town of Franklin and Walpole and Wrentham and Medway. So we had all these towns that we, to make the 15,
Sure.
15 square miles.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, the train station was built near the lake, and trains came from Boston. 6 trains on Sunday, and 5 came in each direction. They came to a siding where a covered bridge was located, and the footbridge went over the lake, and the north side was now connected with the south side. George Campbell sent a pasteboard to President Rutherford B. Hayes, entitling him and his son, Burchard, and friends to visit the park, and a special train would come out and they would be served breakfast prepared by Hall and Whipple of Young's Hotel in Boston. Mr. Whipple superintended the breakfast, and he sent out invitations printed in a folded card with the initials in an elaborate monogram of the president, and enclosed with 5-pointed star. I don't have a picture of it, surrounded by a trophy of flags. The caterer's initials were printed on the card, and the year was June 26, 1877. So you see that park was in operation in 1877. And no doubt the president was very impressed with this. It was a bustling place at that day, and many people along the way came to see the station house decorated with buntings. This was the station house in that area. And the amusement park, let's see if I get this right now. The amusement park that predated Revere Beach and Normbega Park by a few years had a train there. It was called a Silver Comet. And the single fare from Boston was 45 cents. 5 trip tickets cost $2.20. And the City Mills, if you went on, was 25 cents more. Now, Highland Lake was about 22 miles by rail from Boston. And the line to New York was loaded with grain and embossed license plates. I think the train was first called the New England Limited, but popularly called the Ghost Train. And it was a white train, and it had a gold Pullman that was equipped with a palace drawing room car. It was very impressive. Each car had 3 or 4 parlor cars, 2 coaches, a royal buffet smoker, lighted by gas, with velvet carpets, silk draperies, and white silk curtains. It was pretty impressive. The last trip was in 1895, and new management had replaced it with more conventional paint. And one time, too, it was called the Knickerbocker. So we had quite an area there with everything. And the walls, having owned the paper mill, the walls, did I put anything here now? George Campbell had troubles and went bankrupt, but later the company was reorganized, and he died in 1888. And his heirs ran the paper mill before selling it to John Wall and his daughter Kitty. And later, half the privilege of the Fales family was sold to the Department of Corrections in the state of Massachusetts in October 23, 1936. And there's a picture of John Wall's paper mill. And who worked there? William Allen of the Allen family. And his wife worked as a housekeeper at the Murphy House that used to be where the daily service station is. Yeah, she was a housekeeper there.
Yep.
And
that was a big home.
It was a beautiful place.
Yeah, there was beautiful trees out in front of it. They must have been 200
You
years
remember
old.
it.
I remember it, sure.
Yeah, I don't really recall it.
I do, because, well, we used to walk up there when I was a kid. We'd go up and visit Harold Campbell, the old fire police chief up there. And, there was my grandfather's best friend. So I walked by that many times,
That was quite a center.
Yeah. And Gert Murphy lived there.
That's right.
Yeah.
And do you know that Gert Murphy was the first person to own a car in Norfolk.
Was she really?
Yep. Yeah. Well, the Walls, having owned Campbell's paper mill, also owned the Granite City Ice House. And Ann Allen claimed she worked there at that place. And
If Ian said it, it's undoubtedly true. She
Yeah.
was a hot ticket.
yeah, ice was harvested from the old mill pond, which
Sure.
was Highland Lake. And John Chaplin of Seekonk Street, who came from Canada, managed 80 men at the Highland Lake where they cut ice.
I knew John. He's a nice guy.
And the Granite Company, I interviewed his son for
Yeah,
the first
Al.
oral
Al
history
Chaplin.
book.
Yeah.
The ice company also owned 3 other lakes at Quincy and Braintree. And there were up to about 6 cars a day that would be loaded with 250-pound ice blocks.
Yeah.
You know. And
That was hard work cutting ice back in those days.
I know because I lived in Walpole near Clark's Pond, and I can remember when they came and they cut the ice. The guys would be standing on
Yep.
the ice block with this long thing with a hook, and then they put it onto the elevator up into the barn put it into the sawdust. And the day it burned, there was a morning. I woke up and my bedroom was all red, and I wondered what happened. The ice house burned. Yeah, but I can remember also when we had the ice delivered, because I
sure.
grew up at that time when you had to have the pans underneath the ice box to empty, and you put the about every day you were getting ice. And we had an iceman, we called him Barney Google, and he used to come with his horse and wagon, because when I grew up that many years ago, there were still horses and
You know, it was Jim Buckley
yes.
that used to deliver ice here in Norfolk. And I can remember he'd come to my grandfather's house, and Grandpa would say, well, I think a 15-cent piece would be enough.
Yeah.
He'd go out and bring it in and put it in.
And if you were
15
like
cents.
most of the kids, we raced when we saw him to get a
get
piece of ice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was a siding over near the station, a sign placed on Seekonk Street, and the ice house had a chain and wooden conveyor belt and a 50-horsepower motor, and it carried 22 by 32-inch blocks of ice to where the sawdust and the ryegrass would lie.
You know, just as an aside, we talk about climate change and all, but remember back in as you well know, we're talking about it, they used to cut these huge blocks of ice. We have winters now where if there's that much ice on the lakes.
Well, there's so many buildings now, too.
Yeah.
You know, when we first built on our house, it was fields, and I back up to Bill Sweet's property.
Yeah.
And he had the all the fruit trees and everything, and the breezes was wonderful. Now there's houses blocking it. And,
generating
and
heat.
you don't, and they used to have the fences along to prevent the snow.
The snow
from coming.
fences, I remember them well.
Yeah. And the building inspector was also in charge of the fences.
It was a fence viewer.
Yeah, fence viewer. Yeah. The last time the ice was cut there was January 19, and that was in 1931.
Yeah.
I was about 4 years old.
I wasn't even thought of at that point.
Yeah, Mike Devaney's place on Seekonk Street became known as the Columbia Outing Club, a training camp for prize fighters.
That's right.
And boxers. And the well-known sports figures of the time jogged along the streets and the roads. You could see them jogging, working out for an upcoming bout or whatever. And John Lawrence Sullivan was born in Roxbury. He was the first heavyweight boxing champion, and he ranked high in that division. He was the first American sports celebrity who met and sparred for presidents and princes and papas, and he was considered the link between the old style bare knuckle and glove fighting.
Yeah.
And
He was the first heavyweight champion under Marcus of Queensberry rules.
well, the Queensberry rules is a fair stand-up boxing match. You had about a 24 or so ring close. One of the things was no wrestling and no hugging.
Yeah.
And the rounds were about 3 minutes.
Well, they were until somebody got knocked down, in some cases.
Yeah.
John L. Sullivan is in my family tree.
Yes, you
He's
told me.
my grandfather, Bill Sullivan, always told me that someplace along the line he is a distant cousin of his father, who was Dan Sullivan, who owned the John Love House opposite the cemetery and owned that whole farm. And they used to bring chickens, and especially ducks, though, up to the siding for the trains and ship them to Boston.
Yeah. A lot of people, the eggs, chickens, and everything. We were such a farming town.
Oh, yeah.
That's what we were. And it was a wonderful time then. But, you know, the refrigeration was a problem.
Well, that's it, exactly. And he used to kill the ducks and ice them down, put them in these big boxes and bring them up there, and the train would come by and get them into the markets. I have pictures of the old farm and the ducks.
Oh, yes?
And it is like a sea of white.
Well, that's what it was like up around Sharon.
Yeah.
So, it was, and the Weebaducka.
Yeah.
It was like a sea of, what they used to call white, what was it, the white, there were so many ducks and everything. But it was like snows.
Yeah.
It was snows.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, John inherited his combativeness and fondness for alcohol from his father, Mike Sullivan, who came from County Kerry in Kerry in Ireland. And his physique he got from his mother, his formidable mother, who came from Ireland also, Catherine Kelly.
I've got to tell you just one quick little story. John L. Sullivan would come out to my great-grandfather Dan's house on Sundays, and he'd bring an entourage from South Boston with them. And my poor, sainted great-grandmother would have to cook for these guys. And
she only had 15 children.
Yeah. And then, of course, as soon as the noon meal was over, the drinking began.
Oh, boy.
And they'd all get drunk, and then John L. would have to find somebody that would offend him so he could beat him.
Oh, God.
And at that point in time, it was time to go back to Boston. But it always erupted in big fights.
When he was 20 years old, he visited the Columbus Outing Club, and he strutted around the Highland Lake Park and sparred there. And it was quite something. But, you know, Mr. Devaney, Mike Devaney, I went to school with his grandson.
Yeah.
And he had children come out from the slum districts of Boston that he would treat one day. And so they could have ice cream and they could have food and all the wonderful things. And it was at his expense. And about 20 children came out. And he would say that it was at his pleasure. He was that good.
Yeah.
Now, let's see what else I got in here. Well, Highland Lake Grove, I'm probably forgetting about the pictures. Did we have, we had the number 10. Okay, if we get number 11, now look at that beautiful walk through underneath that roof of the bridge. Those were painted big letters, and they had the little flag up there. Beautiful place.
Yeah, go
and
from
they
one
walked
side to
from
the
the
other.
north to the south side, you know. And there are some of the boats. They had canoes and rowboats. And they would walk down to that bridge and cross over to the southern side where there was a lot set up. They had a long bridge, and with the before the property of Thomas Watson. And the check room building was to the right of the bridge, and a bowling alley was in the back of the check room, and there was a spring and a dance hall that was later moved to Foxborough's Lake View Pavilion, and it burned. It burned down, what was it, a year or so ago?
A couple of years ago, yeah, they're rebuilding it now.
And they had a skating rink and a restaurant that was 2 stories high, and the flying horses just before a 16-foot lap track, a merry-go-round, and it was, I think, some of them were in back of Kufal's house. Kufal, you lived on Main Street, and they had a boat wharf and a quarter-mile track, a long horse shed, and a fence around the park. And they had a baseball diamond that was near West Street, a pavilion, a summer house, a swimming hole toward where Gallagher's lived, and the camera obscura near the lap track. And people come out from Boston and had lunches and everything.
Well, when you said that there were 6 trains that ran on Sunday, that's bringing a lot of people out.
Oh, yeah. They did. At times they had 4,000 to 8,000 people there, more than we ever had in our town when I came in.
When I was a kid, I remember 1954 or 1955, we had a census, and we had like 1,000 people in town.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we used to get 4 times as many as that coming out.
Yeah.
Amazing.
On July 6th, in 1886, that's the time that they built the tramp house, the New York and New England Railroad Company gave its annual 4th of July picnic. And usually it was attended by about 4,000 to 8,000 people. And this day, 4,000 people were present. People came from Connecticut, Rhode Island, Boston, and other places. So there was a lot of people there. About 2,500 people were dancing in the pavilion, and they were boating and they were shooting. So, you know, we had a shooting range that was run by William Ray.
Oh, yeah,
Man, I'm sorry, man.
Yeah.
The Ray family, but it was man. Yeah. And I don't know if that's where they did their shooting, but they had shooting there.
They had
which surprised me.
Well, that probably another story for another day, but they used to test rifles.
Oh, yeah.
In their backyard, way back on the other side of the railroad tracks, behind Lucan's house.
We have a picture of the shooting range.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it was all enclosed, so the wind wouldn't affect the flight of the bullet. Yeah.
So, they have it wrong in history. They said Frank ran it, but it was William. He's the one that served in the Civil War. And Frank had a bone factory in Franklin. So some of the history, like in the first book that was put out by the Centennial people that worked on it, there are some errors in it, and this is one of them. And hopefully in 5 years, we're going to be celebrating 150th.
How about that?
And we hope to have a book done by then that with the corrections and more information up to date. So we're looking forward to doing that.
You know, the Centennial brought the town together.
It did.
And
we were small.
We were small.
Yeah.
But it was a heck of a time.
Yeah, I know. I was part of it.
Yeah.
In fact, I got the float for the bells from, and the furniture came from across the street for the oldest man that was living there. He had this old couch and chairs with fringes and everything out in his, well, at that time he had a veranda like, and Oscar Cundy. I asked him if I could have it to put on this float. And we won an award. I engraved it because I was working at the time for a wholesale jeweler.
Sure.
I don't know what happened to it, but we won. And we set it up actually a lot in my backyard. In fact, when we had the 125th, I drove this little Jeep, and it was white, and we decorated it, the Historical Commission. I drove it.
Yeah.
And it was a rainy day, and stopping and starting, and oh my gosh, I finally got it home and put it on the front lawn, and it died. That was the end of the thing. We never, but I mean, these celebrations were great too. The 125th was a good.
You know, everybody had a good time at the Centennial. There wasn't a problem to be had.
No, and then we used to do terrible things. I mean, people wake up and find a toilet in their front yard or anything.
Oh, there's a bunch
and
of
we
crazy
captured
antics,
people,
yeah.
and they had to pay ransom. It was something.
Yeah, if they ever gave tests for alcohol content on that final due, I don't think anybody in town would have passed.
Well, anyway, a row erupted in the restaurant, which proceeded to get really rough. The restaurant was run by a Harvey Parker. And did you know Hovey's had a saloon?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that's where they had their Columbia outing over in his property. Well, as soon as it proceeded to get rough, they closed the saloon part of this. And stones were thrown through the windows, and they began to quarrel with others. And the company's agent telegraphed the company's repair shops in Ord, which I guess was the Reedville, for a force of 20 firemen to act as policemen. And this, I guess, was really quite a big fight.
Oh,
And
gee, you know
they circled around, circulated among the crowd, and it had increased to about 4,000 people at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, you start serving unlimited amounts of beer, and you got shooting going on too.
Well,
that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
I don't think there were any guns involved, but there were about 2:30. A train came in, and a great many had their faces and heads severely cut, and there was a lot of whiskey and rum bottles being circulated among them.
Wow.
And shortly after 3 p.m., entertainment was given. They had a juggler. They had song and dance girls, banjo players, singers, jokes, and then a magician. And the crowd collected near the stage in front of the orchestra. They had an orchestra, shouting at the actors and encoring them, till they were told to go from the front of the stage and stop their outcry. Excuse me, I'll have to have a little water.
Have a pull of that. Seagram 7, right?
Yeah, right. I'll never tell. Immediately, the crowd tore down the scenery and everything on the stage. Wow. And the actors hastily escaped the best way they could. 4 of the special firemen that policed it tried to quell the disturbances and were kicked and beaten, and 2 were badly cut near their eyes, and they'll probably lose the sight in one eye from this. But no pistols were used.
Wow.
But stones and bottles and other missiles.
A rowdy bunch.
Oh, it was terrible. That was a terrible thing. So the crowd became more turbulent and attacked the dance hall and the Camera Obscura and the flower stand and several other things. And they took boats and they rowed over the lake, and faces were blackened and bruised. It was terrible. And so orders were given by the superintendent, Allen, there, to have the train prepared to take the visitors back. And the agents rang the bell to gather everybody up, and I guess they listened to it. So they started them off to the cars, and the crowd went on into the train, and they started bossing everybody, and anybody that could make them upset. And over 20 persons were injured. And this could have been part of the reason that the Highland Lake uh, was shut down, closed. Another thing probably was because automobiles were coming into being, and people could go further, and so it closed.
When you're the only act in town, people really flock to your doors.
Yeah.
But when other things open up, well, you know, there's other things to do.
Yeah. So now we come to Bertha Fales.
Oh, when did the Grove shut down?
Before 1900.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me see. Was I supposed to show some other pictures? Let's see. I hope. Did we show number 14? I don't know. Look, I think that was number 14. Oh no, that's a picture of Highland Lake with the boat, and in the background is where the bridge and everything was, way over. I used to fish there. Here's another picture. Before Ted Weber bought the property, which is now King Philip Trail.
Right.
I used to go with my husband to fish there.
I used to fish there when I was a kid.
Yeah. We got hornpout and all that.
Oh, kivers and the odd bass once in a while. Yeah.
But Ted Weber bought the property in Elna, and I guess about 1955.
Someplace
It
in
was
that
50,
ballpark,
1955. And he did a nice job of building those houses there. He wanted to keep it, you know.
Well, he didn't
just
cut down
quiet.
all the trees.
No.
That was one thing.
My husband wired some of those houses there. My husband was an electrician. In fact, he
Right.
was the assistant wiring inspector when he died. But yeah, and Ted and his wife, I guess they did a pretty good job of that.
You know,
putting those
I was
houses. But it's a shame
Yeah.
because everything was gone.
Yeah, you know
Everything
what?
was gone.
I was, you know, sometimes you see growth in the town and you see what it costs, you know. It takes away a beautiful scenic area, a place where you could go down, you could picnic down there under those huge pine trees.
They did, and even after closed.
And you could fish down there,
It was a gem. We were really fortunate to have that, to be able to get that area. You know, Walpole, it's no wonder they gave it to us. Franklin hated the fact that we weren't going to have city mills. They're Franklin City Mills. They didn't like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they got even with us with Kingsbury Point.
Kingsbury Point, well, maybe it is. But,
Yeah.
no, but I knew, I was in the same class with Ted's son, Chicky.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know,
yes.
and Ted and his wife Eleanor were the nicest people. You know, I to their house many times, and
Really?
you'd think you were the part of the family.
Oh, that was nice to know. He became a doctor, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Children's doctor, I believe, out in Western Mass.
Uh-huh.
And I guess there's a big conglomeration of them out there. But he's done well.
Well, he was the only child.
Yeah.
Elna and Ted were both on the historical commission.
Yep.
We used to meet at Ted's house for some of our meetings.
Yeah.
He was in a wheelchair. And then, of course, Elna donated many things to the historical. She was a lovely woman.
She was.
Her brother, Albin, unfortunately died in a fire, the house that burned nearby their home, and it was horrible.
Yep.
Yeah.
He
used to be over there at the Trout Club.
The Trout Club, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he'd come in, I'd give him a license because he had to get one every year. I was working at the town clerk tax collector's office.
Yep.
It was a dual job. It was a lot going on.
You were up to it, though.
I don't know. There was a lot going on in that office. I mean, it was busy. Well, I want to talk about Bertha Fales.
Sure.
She was born to Silas Everett Fales. Now, a lot of these names like Everetts and Clarks and everything, we have Everett Street and we have Clark Street. And Clark Street, I guess I was bad because I worked at the prison briefly in the steward's office. And always their mail was addressed to Main Street. And I found out it wasn't Main Street.
No,
they
that's
were
Park
on.
Street.
So, right.
Yeah,
so
Main
I
Street
went
goes
to
the other way.
I went to the town clerk and I had her sign an affidavit stating that it was not Main Street. And so I wrote to the prison after I left. And when my son went to work there, they said, "We know your mother. She's the one that changed our letterheads and everything."
Now, you were there on the work release program, right? At the prison?
Oh, never. Never.
Oh.
But anyway, her mother was Mary Geary, and her father's second wife. That was his second wife. His first wife, he had a daughter, Sarah. So she had a half-sister. And there was a brother, John. And the second house that he had was built on Avery Street. Now is Boardman Street.
Right.
They were going to name it, or they did, after Reverend Avery, but like so many things in town, their names get changed. But we do have the square now, and on Union Street, the circle, they have the roundabout we did name. And we have Ware Circle in town now, because thanks to the Historical Commission and Barbara Bartholomew, who just done so much work. She, I don't know, that woman has a mind like a steel trap. And I call her a walking encyclopedia because I don't care what you ask her, she knows the answer usually.
Yeah.
And she's worked so hard, and I got to give her credit for a lot of the things that I have learned, about the town of Norfolk, because she researched. She's a terrific researcher.
Yeah.
And she did this panel of the Bertha Fales Memorial Park, which I'm going to talk about. She has one on top of the town hill that's there, a big panel, and over at City Mills. If you haven't read it, terrific job.
Yeah.
And then she did on Highland Lake. Betsy Whitney has yet to finish hers and will be presented at Pondville because she is going to do a panel. So the Historical Commission has done an awful lot to keep people aware of what was in the past.
It's so important, too, I think, what you've done, going around interviewing the old folks.
It was a pleasure. And I was fortunate because I grew up in Walpole, right down from the high school on Mass Ave. And when I went to school, the Norfolk kids didn't have a high school, and I met a lot of them.
I went there the first 3 years of high school. I went to Walpole High.
And then when I worked around town, I was on various committees. I think the first committee in town, I was on the War Memorial for Korean War. I was on that committee with Fran Stone, that's Chuck's mother, and Hovey, and God bless Charlie Groff. He was our chairman. He just passed away.
5 minutes.
Oh, and I wanted to talk about Bertha.
Yeah.
Who I lived on Boardman Street, and you could refer much to Barbara's history, or Betsy's history. Betsy Bigelow lived there, and the house burned down.
I remember. I saw the house burn down. It burned down at noontime.
Now, Silas Everett was the first town clerk, and he served 22 years there. Bertha attended the Meeting House School on Main Street, which is situated where Daily Service Station is, and Dunkin' Donuts. And later she attended the Swedenborgen School in Waltham and went on to Bridgewater Normal School, now Bridgewater State College. And she worked as a governess in Long Island. And some history sources say she worked for Teddy Roosevelt, but I don't know. I can't find anything. Her father died. She returned to Norfolk for her afterwards and care for her mother. She walked. She used to walk to the railroad station because she worked in Boston as a secretary for a while and took the train from here. They had about an acre of family land that she plowed and raised strawberries and vegetables. And around 1920, she began her writing for the history, filling 13 shorthand books, notebooks, and most of the history she gathered from Mary Thompson, who lived at the Whalelands. She used to go out and visit her and talk to her. She entrusted her books to a lawyer, and later become a judge, Sidney Carpenter. And I interviewed his wife, Florence, for the first book that Oral History put out. And he gave them to the Dedham Historical Society, where they remained for about 20 years until Agnes Bristol, who was on the library trustee, placed them in our town library. And Bertha, of course, moved to Douglas, and she had a tough time there, and she died in Rentham. She sold her share of the dam in 1937 to the Mass Department of Corrections in 1943, donated 13.5 acres along the river to the town of Norfolk. And this land was taken by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and incorporated into the Charles River Natural Valley Storage.
Yeah.
But anyway, we have a panel up there just put in, and we're going to dedicate it on the 26th of April at 2 o'clock.
26th of
Sunday.
April, 2 o'clock. Mm-hmm. My gosh, by golly.
So
That'll be great. And it'll be right there, up there where the dam is?
underneath the arch bridge,
Okay.
go up Campbell Street and go to the right.
Yeah.
There's a little section.
Yeah.
It's there. Up above is a pole with a sign
Yep.
for the walk. They can walk up that way for the.
Oh, that'll be terrific.
You know, and it's a preserve because she wanted people to enjoy
Sure.
nature, enjoy
Absolutely.
the trees and the flowers
Yeah,
and the
and
birds.
fresh air and animals and all that
that's
stuff.
what it's for. It's
Yeah.
nothing.
That's great.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. Thelma, I'm going to really thank you for dragging all this stuff together.
Well, you
and
know,
coming
I
in
think I
and-
made a mistake at the beginning, but
Oh, listen.
I'm a little bit nervous about it.
Well, being on with a guy like me, a living
Yeah, I know.
legend. Yeah.
I know. You're just too handsome.
Too good to be true.
Yeah.
The whole package. My wife doesn't appreciate it.
Yeah,
you
she
know,
doesn't.
She sees
Oh
right-
no, I don't want to listen to that. I know she's a wonderful woman, and I like Sue
She'd have
very
to be
much.
to put up with me. But, you know, boy, I'll tell you, this was great. The time flew. And
I
would
guess
love
it-
to do it again sometime. We can think of some things to talk about.
I don't know about that.
Well-
I'm getting old and decrepit. I'm not the same. I haven't got the spunk I used to have.
The march of time. honey.
I know.
Yeah, we're all going down that path.
You know what they say? Time flies like an arrow. Fruit flies like a banana.
All right. My friends, I hope you enjoyed today's show. And we look forward to doing more of this. And I really want to thank you for tuning in. And I wish you a very pleasant good evening. Thank you.
Adios.
Adios.